Okay, good morning. Glad I didn't scare everybody off. There's still people coming back. Stay put, right. So Sherry has all the handouts. If anybody comes in, please guide them towards Sherry. Last week I kept walking away and giving them out, and I got yelled at because the people online couldn't hear anything I had to say. And so I'm going to be good. If I do step away from the mic because that's my tendency, please direct me back to it. I tend to roam. You know, even when I was in my dorm in college, when I'd study, I'd pace. I don't stand still well, so I'm going to do my best. All right, so we ended last week with the beginning of the Inquisition, and that's where I want to pick up. The Inquisition becomes, for the Jews in Spain, a dominant force from which nobody is really safe. The active, you know the name, the active character, the spirit behind the building of the Inquisition was Tomás Torquemada, all right, and it was appointed the head of it in 1482. So let me give you some background to that moment very quickly. Ferdinand and Isabella get married in 1469. Neither of them is queen or king yet, but Torquemada at that point becomes Isabella's confessor. And so he's got this in and influence. 5 years later in 1474, Isabella becomes the queen, and therefore he now has access to the throne per se, and all the dies are set. Everything is now possible for what can happen going forward. So the Inquisition begins to get very aggressive. What is their goal? First of all, they do not necessarily have any influence on Jews. Their influences are on those Jews that were forced to convert. They're looking for those who are heretics, meaning they converted, whether by force or not, and are still practicing Judaism in process. That's their charge. And what happens is they begin to search for proof that the Jews are guiding the conversos back to Judaism. So your daughter marries, and your daughter converts. You as a parent are trying to bring them back. You're the threat. And so what they begin to do is to seek ways to separate Jews from conversos. That is the first goal they take on. Right? This makes sense. Logically, it makes sense. It's what you would do in the same kind of situation. And additionally, what they succeeded in doing was making the entire Christian population into its eyes, ears, and turned them into spies in a sense. Because they're all looking to see who has converted, but it's still got, there's no smoke coming out of the chimney on Friday evening. So people are reporting them. The Inquisition develops into a powerful, a corrupt, and a cruel institution that is using unreliable, in other words, motivated people to report, people who they're not necessarily looking for facts, they have motivations otherwise, to torture and to obtain evidence, quote unquote, confiscate property, and to carry out public executions. Now the piece about confiscating property is significant. There is, if I can report somebody is practicing Judaism behind the scenes, even if they're not, I might get their property. So there's a financial piece to this as well. There's some extra handouts over here if you didn't get. The severity, the cruelty, yes, Eric. It wasn't necessarily absolute. There might be a sharing. The property, for example, the tangible properties, that which is not connected might go to the church. But I can get your home. What's the church going to do at your house? What's that? You turn in your competitors. Right. There's always, I started, every course I teach on anti-Semitism, I said this last time as well, there's always an economic component. Always. And there's a benefit to turning in someone if you can get their property. I didn't say it's moral, I just said there's a benefit. But the cruelty that's being used is so extreme that the conversos actually reach out to the Pope. And the Pope in January 1482 writes to Isabella and to Ferdinand and expresses his concerns about the abuses that are happening in the Spanish Inquisition. So the Pope is not happy with the way, he's not unhappy with the process, with it, the overall, he's unhappy with the way it's being instituted. He issues several bulls expressing those concerns about procedural irregularities, the suffering of the conversos, and his complaints, the Pope's complaints, focus on the following kinds of issues. One, a lack of proper legal procedures. Are you sure? Two, confiscation of the property from the accused. He recognizing these aren't necessarily Christians who are motivated by their Christianity. Okay? Three, the severity and the speed of punishments. And four, that there are no appeals. People have no way to fight back, in a sense. The Pope attempts to curb some of the excesses, but his attempts are resisted by Isabella and Ferdinand. They basically say, we want control of the Inquisition on our lands, Pope, butt out. And so not long after, the Pope approves the expansion of the Inquisition because it basically realizes I don't have the power here to make a change. An auto de fe, which is basically, it translates as an act of faith, was a public ceremony during which the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, where sentences were pronounced against those found guilty of heresy or something like that, or other offenses against Catholic doctrine. They were highly ritualized procedures, public spectacles that included, they take the heretic, march him through the city, reading of the charges against the accused, public confession or a profession of faith, pronouncements of sentences, all being done public. They want everyone to see. Reconciliation for those who repent, in other words, agree, forget it, I'm giving up my Judaism completely. Execution, typically burning at the stake for those deemed unrepentant. That is what was going on. From 1481 on, auto de fes continue without intermission. There was rarely a month in which one didn't occur. And property of immense value was confiscated, most of which went to the crown, which is what you pointed out, but not all, okay? But here's the point of making it that there's an economic component. Even the dead weren't spared, meaning their bones are exhumed and they're burned after a mock trial and their possessions are confiscated. In other words, they wanted the property. So you dig somebody up, take their property. Not a lot of a defense from the dead. All right. Are we all uplifted? Did I get you? You good? Good. Expulsion from Andalusia. An expulsion, the southern territory is Andalusia, and by 1483 it's under Christian control. In a few minutes I'm going to go back before that. But right now in 1483 it's under Christian control. The crown approves in 1483 the expulsion of Jews from this southern territory of Spain. Within a month, the Jews are required there to depart and to disperse among other regions of the state. All right? The penalty for not doing so is death. The time limit of 1 month not only makes life difficult for the Jews, but it makes life difficult for the Christians living there because you've got reciprocal settlements of debt, right? Issues like that. I don't want you leaving until you pay your debt. You've got sale of property, possessions of the exiled, etc. There's economic reasons why a month is not sufficiently long enough, not only for the Jews, but those who are being left behind, who want to settle all the economic issues. But at the end of the day, it is religious in nature in terms of the attempt here is to respond to the evil root of Judaizing. In other words, trying to get the converts to come back. That's what they're trying to remove from the society. And therefore, action is taken against the Jews, and this is confirmed, and just in case it's from Andalusia, this is confirmed because 9 years later they're thrown out of all of Spain. This is just the prelude to what's coming. The Inquisition understood, as I said, the need to separate Jews from the conversos. And oftentimes that meant families splitting apart. They demanded a distance between them. They put on trial the conversos. They declared them as heretics. But there's another factor that's at play here as well. And this is how, unless you know history, you can use it to your advantage. One of the things that the Jews are being accused of is for their supposed role almost 700 years prior, 800 years prior, in delivering Spain to the Muslims in 711. Okay? The accusation is that 800 years ago you did this, therefore you might do it again. This is in 1483, they just conquered the southern part of Spain from the Muslims, and it's not only are they getting rid of the Muslims, they're getting rid of the Jews because the Jews will work to bring back Muslim rule. That's the fear. All right, so now I'm going to go back. Everybody with me? I'm going to go back just a couple of years prior while the Muslims are still in Spain, in the southern part of Spain. Spain, for the last couple hundred years before this, the northern part of Spain is Christian, the southern part of Spain is Muslim. There's been some periods of coexistence, and Jews as well, where everybody got along theoretically, but at this point, there's not. Relations between the Christians and the Muslims were relatively calm between 1465 and 1481. There's a 16-year period. Why? Because the Muslims are distracted by all sorts of internal political issues. They're busy. They got their own problems right now. The Christians are distracted because they're at war with Portugal over the islands off of Africa, primarily the Canary Islands. So they're at war with Portugal and therefore don't have time to worry about the Muslims. And so for this period of time, they sort of live and let live. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. 1479, Fernando becomes king of Aragon, and that essentially unites Castile and Aragon because they've been married for 10 years. And I lost my train of thought here. And so what happens at this point is they conquer Portugal, and they conquer the Canary Islands. That war ends. By the way, that has really significant, I was reading a book on Columbus recently, very significant impact. Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America for Spain because they conquered the Canary Islands. Portugal had been the more effective seafaring country. What is significant about the Canary Islands? It gives you a base that is closer to North America. And therefore, it's a shorter trip. If you're going to make a trip from Spain or Portugal, you're going to stop there. So when Spain conquers the Canary Islands, it becomes Spain and their representatives who come to North America or South America or Central America. Okay, Central America. All right, so that war is significant. When that is over, as I said, then Fernando becomes king, and there are frontier raids being made until 1481, at which point you now have outright war between North and South Spain, Muslims and Christians. There's no longer any of the other distractions, and the Pope calls for a crusade, a holy war against the Muslims in Andalusia. Again, there's often a distinction between what the leadership says and what the way the people understand it. All right, the true rationale for the great majority of the Christians in this period of time is to acquire territory and wealth and slaves and regional power. Those who are captured are sold as slaves. So there's money to be made. It's all economic. The wars these wars and how the Christians treated The non-Christians, at this point in time, when they captured somebody, they would auction off the women and the girls into slavery by the thousands, receiving the highest prices, and it produces crucial lessons in what essentially is the inhumane treatment of non-Christians. And so when you read about Columbus coming to North America, coming to Central America, and treating people so horribly, he's just doing what he has seen in the environment in which he came from. The Christian world has, at this point in time, and again, everything is, you have to put it in its time, has declared if you are a non-Christian, you're open game. And so Columbus does the same thing. It makes sense. He doesn't know better, doesn't know anything else. By the way, the study of Columbus is fascinating. If you have time, please find a way to do that. Financing. Okay, now you go to war. What does it require? Dollars. Or not dollars, but you get the point, money. And so you not only need manpower, you have financial demands, and so what happens is that they put special taxes upon the Jews. They are the other. So now the Jews are paying 3 taxes. Let's call the first one is an income tax, whatever it is. Everybody's paying it, everybody who lives there. You have a special Jew tax that they've been paying all along, and now you've got a war finance tax that's being put on the Jews from a group of people who don't have any money. They've been prevented from working in the fields and doing and owning land and working in the guilds and any kind of real occupation of production. So it's unclear, I'll get this in a second, but it's unclear. It's somewhere between 300,000 and 800,000. It's significant. No, who end up expelled. So that doesn't even include those who converted. Right. You're talking about a significant population. And by the way, by the 1480s, I've been listening to a lecture on English history, but it's true all over. This is all post-Black Plague. So if you've got 1 million Jews, you're talking about they probably would double that prior. It is significant. In addition, what the government would do would be to take Jews as captives and then ransom them back to the Jewish community. So there was another 4th tax that was established upon them. And finally, they would take the Jews in the community into their armies and insist the Jewish community pay for their needs. So you can see what's happening is you've got an entirely impoverished society of Jews. That is just the outcome, and that is the goal, to make life uncomfortable enough that everybody will convert. That is the goal. While this war is going on, you have propaganda being dispersed throughout. The crown, even though they had, during the 1480s when they were at war with Portugal, they had put aside the issue, they were already laying the groundwork. They were against Jews. They were doing everything that they could to turn public opinion against the Jews. Pamphlets were printed supporting the Inquisition and using texts from Jeremiah in support of what they were saying. They knew the Bible. They were well versed in Jewish law. They were well versed in the meaning of the commandments. And so what they did is they encouraged the collection of evidence against the Jews who were still living by Jewish law. They knew the signs. Putting fresh linens out on Friday afternoon was a sign. Going to somebody's house who then you go to their home and you say, I don't like ham, was a sign. They knew what they were talking about. The pamphlets and these other attempts ultimately proved to be insufficient to sort of whip up the frenzy that they're looking to create against, to create the severe measures against the Jews. And so at the first opportunity, since that's not working, the Inquisition latches onto a new blood libel charge. This is from, most of it was from before. They bring to the table a new blood libel charge. Everyone accused was found guilty and burnt at the stake in November of 1491. The public announcement of how this comes about was that there was a Jewish converso plot against the Christian state, the Inquisition, the Christian faith, and the residents of the kingdom. All this had been, they had found, but it was all exposed. It's easy to demonize the other, and I'll let you write your own political statements from there. It was a frenzy. Torquemada immediately presents a memorandum to the queen. He wants her to know about this blood libel, for sure. In 1491, there is a treaty of surrender by the Muslims, puts an end to Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula, and the treaty itself explicitly says that the Jews of Granada have to leave within a month. That's what we talked about before. The victorious monarchs want to end any kind of presence of Jews on the Iberian Peninsula. March 31st, 1492. 1492 probably strikes a bell. Columbus, and you'll hear it in a second. Ferdinand and Isabella sign the edict of expulsion of Jews from all of Spain, and they have 4 months to get out. In other words, the end of July, August 1st. You'll see why that's important in a second. The soil of Spain has been purified of Muslim rule. The Inquisition is in place, and now Jews can be expelled. Christian Spain inscribed on its banner, one flock, one shepherd. That was the model. From the leadership role, no. You'll see the people in the leadership come to things on different levels. Leadership is not expelling them. They expect them to stay. They want the Jews out because they're an influence. They're hoping over time that the conversos will become more and more Christianized, and therefore. Okay? This event, I've said this before, is one of the most momentous events in Jewish history. It parallels the final revolt against Rome. It parallels the Holocaust. These, I would say to you, are probably the 3 liminal moments in Jewish history. The numbers were such large numbers. They really represented, we have this constant 1/3 of the Jewish people, 1/3 of the Jewish people, 1/3 of the Jewish people that gets affected by these 3 events. Centuries, but in addition to just the loss, what you've got here is they had been rooted in Spain for 1,000 years. They'd been acculturated. They felt like Spaniards, the way we feel like we're Americans. They'd been integrated. And so this edict is one of sheer shock and trauma for them. It's not simply leaving any land. It's the land of 1,000 years in family. Right, cemeteries. So you have, as a result, you have mass conversions of Jews because they can't leave. They don't want to leave. No, they were. They didn't want to. And so they converted. March 31st, 1492, I said that in the Alhambra, in eastern Spain, the Spanish sovereigns decree that Jews have to leave all of their dominions, the crowning disaster of Jews in medieval Europe. And before the publication of this edict, in other words, it comes out in March. It's been written months before, but they keep it from the eyes of public officials. They are trying to prevent it from being divulged prematurely. They want to make sure it happens when it happens, nothing else. Reading number 3 is from that edict. Please, online, for those online, these readings are on the website. You'll find them there. And the next 3 lectures are also already there, all the readings, etc. So if you can't make one of them, and you can get the reading and listen on YouTube to the material, the lectures themselves. Reading number 3. You know well that the argument, they are certain bad Christians and Judaized and who committed apostasy against our holy faith, Catholic faith, much of it the cause of communications between Jews and Christians. Therefore, in the year 1480, we ordered that the Jews be separated from the cities and towns of our domain, and that they have been given separate quarters, hoping that by separation, the situation would be remedied. If we can get the Jews away from the conversos, their influence will be limited. And we ordered an inquisition be established in such domains, and the 12 years since it has functioned, the Inquisition has found many, quote, guilty people. Furthermore, we are informed by the Inquisition and others that the great harm done to the Christians, and it continues because of the conversations and communications that they, meaning the conversos, have with the Jews trying by whatever manner to subvert our holy Catholic faith and trying to draw faithful Christians away from their beliefs. These Jews instruct these questions and ceremonies and observances of their law. They circumcise their children. They give them books with which to pray. They declare unto them the days of fasting and meeting with them to teach them the histories of their law, notifying them when to expect Passover, how to observe it, giving them the unleavened bread, and ceremonially preparing meats and instructing them in the things from which they should abstain, both with regard to food items and other things requiring observances of their laws of Moses, making them understand that there is no other law or truth beside it. All of which, then, is clear that on the basis of confessions from such Jews, as well as those perverted by them, that resulted in great damage and detriment of our holy Catholic faith. You have a sense of what's going on here? Okay. Torquemada says something similar. Let's read his words reading 4. There's a lot of readings in the next few minutes. I apologize, but I want you to hear their words, not mine. And then in the account number 5, I want you to feel the sort of ongoing nature of what they experience. Number 4, though. It has been proven that unconverted Jews, through various means, ways, and matters, attempted to steal away Christians from our holy faith and have them depart from it, bring them and perverting them to their damned beliefs and opinions, instructing them in ceremonies and in observance of their law, making congregations where they are read to and taught what they had to hold and keep and maintain in observance of the said law, arranging for circumstances for them and for their sons, giving them books in which there were prayers to be made each year, and accompanying them in the temples of their ancestors in order to read and teach them the history of their law, informing them in advance of the festivals of Passover, you hear an echo here, holidays and mourning days, and advising them of what they had to observe and do, giving them and placing unleavened bread in their hands, and meat, something's wrong here, and meat killed, that's not right, according to their ceremonies in order to celebrate these holidays and festivals, instructing them in things in which they had to partake, such as food and other things, etc., etc., etc. In other words, they understood the rituals of Judaism. They understood the life cycle, the holiday cycle, the patterns of Jewish life, and their accusation is that the Jews are, those who converted, the conversos, are continually being influenced by the Jews who are taking them away from our holy Catholic faith. That's the message. Well, it was read from pulpits. It was read, it was read publicly. Remember, at public squares where these things are being distributed, all right, and pronounced. Torquemada repeatedly emphasizes that the last date of departure was to be July 31, 1492, adding that it was forbidden to remain in Spain and in the towns of its diocese after that, so even any Spanish conquered territory as well. Those remaining would be judged according to the law, meaning condemned to death. Yes. Nobody knows. Yeah, there's all sorts of. Yeah, I've read it too, and I've read Columbus was a Jew. There's all sorts of these kinds of things that are possible. Look, the documentation's not great on those kinds of things, and so in the absence. And everything I'm reading is saying that's just baloney. I understand. What's happening is what we're trying to do is retrospectively make it fit what we want. Yeah. There's like the Bet Hey, Bezrat Hashem on some of the letters. It's unclear if it really says that, number one. Number two, it's unclear that they're his documents. There's all sorts of problems. I hear that. Take all of that with a grain of salt. I can't tell you he wasn't Jewish, but I'm not ready to stand up and announce that they have proof to say he was Jewish. That's what we want. And on the other hand, Columbus has become such a despised character, I'm not sure we want to claim him as a Jew. It's the other piece of it. Let's give him to somebody else. Yeah, yes. No, they're not seeking converts from outside of the previous Jewish world. It is an attempt to get the conversos back. By the way, it's a great question because you need to understand that Jews historically have not sought converts since about the 12th century. Why? Because the Christian world made it clear that anybody who converts and the person who performs the conversion would be killed. That's a demotivating action. And so since that period of time, Jews have not sought converts. There's some question you see in some of the reform journals, et cetera, about maybe it's time to start going back to the way it was before that. But we have not sought converts since early in the previous millennium. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said. A lot, probably not, but I'm going to talk about Columbus in a second and his journey as well. A lot is not, that's not the label I'd put on it. Yeah. Okay. Reading number 5. This is Abarbanel's eyewitness description of the expulsion. So Abarbanel is a Spanish rabbi, has great influence in the time, and so he's an eyewitness to what is going on. These are his, and I apologize again for the length, but I think it has value. So we're looking at 1492-ish. Yeah. The king of Spain captured the kingdom of Granada with the great city of Granada and its environs. In his victory, his heart was uplifted and changed, and he credited his power to God. He was successful because that's what God deemed. So Esau is always, in rabbinic writings, a reference to Christianity. If you think 1984 and all the different characters and what they represent, Esau represented the Christianity. How can I please the God who has girded me with strength in war? And how can I thank my master who has given this city into my hand? If not, by bringing under his wings the people who walk in darkness, the scattered sheep of Israel, and by bringing the wayward daughter to his religion and his belief, or else send them to another land, so that they will no longer dwell in my land, nor remain in my sight. And so the word of the king went forth like the laws of Persia and Media, from the book of Esther, decreeing, this is what it says, all the families of the house of Israel who are baptized and bow down and worship the God of the Gentiles will eat of the fruit of the land like us and dwell in the land and trade of it. So in other words, if you converted, welcome. If you refuse and rebel and do not mention my God's name and do not worship my God, then set up and depart from among my people. Get lost from the lands of Spain, Sicily, Majorca, and Sardinia that are under my rule, so that after 3 months there shall not remain one trace of him who is called Jacob of Israel in all the lands of my kingdom. That's the edict itself. Okay? As I was present in the king's court, now you have the Abarbanel speaking, I exhausted myself with words to the king. I addressed him. 3 times I pleaded with him, won't you save us, O king? Why are you doing this to your servants? Ask of us a high price, gold and silver, and anything any one of Israel owns, and they will give it up for their land. I have called upon my friends who were close to the king to plead for my people, And nobles gathered to speak to the king forcefully to reverse the wrathful decree and his plan to destroy the Jews. But he, like a deaf viper that stops its ears, would not respond. And the queen stood at his right hand to urge him on to complete the work he had begun. We struggled, but we were not successful. I did not rest. I didn't remain silent. But the day of wrath came. And the people heard the terrible news and they mourned. Everywhere that the king's decree arrives, there was heavy mourning and a great fear and sorrow, such as had not been seen since the day Judah was exiled from his land, referencing Babylonia. Each man said to his brother, "Be strong for our religion and for the Torah of our God, against the voice of the slanderer and the blasphemer and the avenger. If he lets us live, we shall live. And if he kills us," meaning God, "we shall die. But we will not profane our covenant. Our hearts will not retreat, and we will walk in the name of the Lord our God." He's pointing up, he's suggesting martyrdom here. Okay? Powerless, 300,000 of the people, I among them, from young to old, infants and women, on one day all departed from the lands of the king to wherever the wind took them. And they went out with our God, their king, at their head. Again, our God, the king, making a definite point of saying, forget this Ferdinando guy. Right, Ferdinand guy. Some went to the nearby kingdoms of Portugal and Navarre, where they encountered trouble and darkness, and the evil of violence and hunger and disease. Some of them set to sea, and there too the hand of God was against them to strike and destroy them. For many miserable ones were sold as slaves in the lands of the Gentile, and many sank like lead into the mighty waters. Others were burned with their ships by the fire of God. No one was spared from his harsh judgment, who by sword and who by captivity, there's a reference to Rosh Hashanah, as our father said, we perish, we are lost, all of us lost. May the name of the Lord be blessed. Yeah. Not that I know. I don't believe so. Yeah, he left. Yeah. So he's a classic example of some of the Jews, a common in Iberian Jewry at the time. He's wealthy. He's an educated businessman. He's a public servant who's moving freely within the king's realm. And at the same time, he's a rabbi. A rabbi devoted significant energy and talent to serious Torah scholarship. Yeah. He was, right, how did he get access to the king at this point? It's because he had helped the king get financing for the wars against Portugal. Right? He was part of the courtyard. All right? Very well respected. Abarbanel, however, gives the story a bit of a Jewish spin. All right? And he uses Babylonia as Jews love to use the past as references and analogies to current events. So he's saying to them, this is like Babylonia. The Jews condemn the cruel enemy, but they see the hand of God in the disaster. And you saw that, he said that in terms of the people dying. They fight, but then they accept their fate. You had this in Babylonia. What the Jews did, and same thing in Rome, is when they lost their wars, they saw it as God's decree that they were not observant enough, and therefore God was simply punishing them. Right? So here, when they're, even though they fight at the end, when they're expelled, they see it as the hand of God, because they weren't good enough Jews, quote unquote. Right. But it sounds like a terrible argument, and it's not an argument I'd make anymore in the world, certainly post-Holocaust. But it probably is one of the reasons Jews have survived. Every time they got attacked, they doubled down. Right? We're at fault. That Torquemada, that Achashverosh are sent by God to remind us they're the hand, what's his name from, I'm drawing blanks on names, forgive me, I hate this aging thing. That's just, can't find names and nouns and anything else. Yes. So I'm not going to waste your time looking for it. Yes? This is what God intended. It is a way, look, we all engage in sense-making, even in the face of suffering. And so we tend to see the hand of God and try to make sense of what did I do wrong or we do wrong that led to this behavior. That is a normal human behavior. Yes. Yes. On the other hand, I'd say to you, and this is totally, we remember the information that we got wrong. All right? So sometimes there's a lesson even in getting something wrong. When I took a test at the seminary, and there's 5 different forms of the Kaddish. There's literally a 5th form that is known as the Kaddish Le'it Chadata, which is recited only at cemeteries. And it's not used by anybody but the Orthodox anymore. It's a specific Kaddish. Why do I remember that? I got it wrong. I didn't remember it. So, afterwards, what has stuck with me 46 years later? What I got wrong? All right. Their sense, it's not like they sat down and have this conversation. But how do you make sense of this kind of devastation? You can either say it's random, or you can say there's a divine will behind this. And the way you do that is by saying we can improve our situation by changing our behavior. That's exactly what it is. You were next in the Joyce. And Spain, by the way, at that point, until the 1950s, Spain had not officially declared an end to the Inquisition. But nonetheless, they weren't practicing it anymore. Yes, you were next, and then you're. Five. Yep. So I'm going to jump ahead because I'm looking and realize I thought I had another 40 minutes and I have 15. Oops. All right. Decisions. It is a difficult decision to leave. It is not just, it means picking up and walking away from homes and lands that you've owned for years. So you bought your home. By the way, it's no longer yours, you're leaving. That's not an easy decision. As someone who's leaving his home, it's not easy. All right? Leaving behind, abandoning millennial old cemeteries where all your family is buried is not easy. These were relatives. These were people you cared about, and you would never see them again. Families would be further separated in the chaos. They're crossing borders. They're boarding ships. They're making their way past. Often, as they were making their way past, hostile onlookers were attacking them. And so families in the process of leaving are separated, never to be seen again. This is not easy. For poor Jews, it's even more difficult. They don't have the funds for sea passages. Those who are older or in poor health face questions of, can I survive a journey? All right? Traveling by land was not easy. And so some of them, particularly the elderly and the infirm, surrendered and simply converted because there wasn't an option. They were too weary. They were too fearful to make the journey. They were too poor to make the journey. They were too discouraged by what had just happened. There's a devastation to 1,000 years of loss. And so the question, and then for others, the question becomes, am I a Spaniard first or am I a Jew first? We recognize this in American identity today. Okay? Where is my primary loyalty when the two come into conflict? If America tomorrow morning says, get out, what do you do? I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I'm paralleling here. What do you do with that? There were non-religious reasons for people to convert. So for conversion here as well, there's people who are already on the fringes of society. If you are Jewish and a criminal or engaged in some kind of antisocial behavior, you've already been somewhat put aside by the Jewish community. So maybe it's a benefit to convert and just find my way back in and start fresh. Additionally, there are rabbis in the community who, when their families are threatened, they convert, and that just leads and gives permission to others to follow their lead. And then finally, you have family ties. Again, if you're leaving and your daughter has converted and you know leaving means I'll never see my child again, what's your decision? It's not as simple as it may seem. It's very, very conflicting. Finances. There's a financial benefit of both staying, because if you become a Christian, you now have the opening. But there's also this for those who leave, they have, there's a benefit as well to working with the conversos. So for example, when I go to leave, I have to sell. I'm going to get whatever I can for my property. It might be $1 on 100, but I'm going to get my money. If I can sell my property to a relative who's a converso who's going to give me full value, right, there's a benefit there. The dangers of leaving, people, for whatever reason, when they began to leave and look for ways to get out of the country, the Christian population around them began to attack them. They were looking to gain as much financial benefit as they could by seizing their property, demanding payments of debt, to the point that the crown had to step in and start escorting the Jews out of the country to protect them from the larger population. Now the question becomes, okay, now I've confronted all the dangers of leaving, but I have much more on my decision. Where am I going to go? All right? Most countries have said to me, we don't want you. Jews have already been expelled from England and France and so many other places. Where am I going to go? How am I going to get there? How costly is the journey going to be? What are the dangers on this journey? What are the chances of arriving safely? If I'm not going to arrive safely, what's the whole point? And what would be, when you leave, what's the fate of those I'm leaving behind? All these are real questions in this decision to move. The task of finding a new home is not easy. They've been, as I said to you, they've been forced out of everywhere. It's not clear where they're going to go. So where do they go? So some of them try going a sea. They go from Iberia to Istanbul. By the mid-16th century, this is what they're doing. All right, what's the problems there? Well, pirates threaten both the sea and the land routes. So you're going to encounter pirates. The sea itself was fraught with danger. Crews abused the Jews. You have a people that's fleeing. They don't have anything, right? There's no reason not to. Many of them sold them as slaves to the pirates. They simply robbed them of their possessions. And other Jews were thrown into the sea and their possessions confiscated. When they arrived, now, so let's assume they actually got all the way there. When they arrived, at times their children were removed from them and sold to Christian families. The psychological, the theological, the religious, all these factors are playing against them. It's not, you have a sense of how tragic this is and how all-encompassing it is. Now getting to 1492, and there's a different journey some of them went on, as people describe. Columbus sets sea in 1492. His ship leaves on August 3rd. What was the deadline for Jews to get out? July 31st. Several people converted in order to get on that ship. So were they Jews? Were they conversos? How do you label them? It's unclear. Yes, sir. You had a question? Oh, okay. We do know that one of the passengers on the ship kept a diary. His Christian name was Luis de Torres, but born Yosef ben Halevi, and he was the interpreter for Christopher Columbus. He converted the day before so that he could get on the ship. There's a reading here, number 8. I'm jumping ahead. The fateful day of our expulsion from Spain was the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, on the Jewish calendar in the year 5242. That marked the tragedy of the destruction of both holy temples many centuries before, and now one more tragic event was added to that mournful day. 300,000 people, half that amount that were redeemed from Egyptian slavery, descend to the Mediterranean shore, searching for passage to a new land, to a land where they could openly practice Judaism. I was among them. You have a question? Can I finish the reading and then I'll, yeah, okay? However, I was not a refugee. I had been commissioned to join Christopher Columbus's voyage of discovery. I agreed to accompany him because I hoped that if we found Jewish brethren, the 10 lost tribes, I would be able to live my life in peace and in freedom. Don Rodriguez, his uncle, Don Gabriel Sanchez Alonso, I don't know how to pronounce that, and there's a few more names here I'm going to let you read, all agreed with my reasoning and joined, but except for Rodrigo, they sailed on other ships. We are a large group of conversos, so that answers somebody's question, living in a perpetual fear of the Inquisition, hoping that we would find a way out of the precarious situation we were in. Columbus thought that we would reach China and the Far East. He would there locate the exiled Jews from the lost 10 tribes, and he wanted me to be able to communicate with them. Yes, ma'am. So the answer is probably. Yeah. The question was, did the Spanish government know the Tisha B'Av, of the 9th of Av in the history? And the answer is yes. Many of these countries that expelled Jews did so very deliberately. There's a symbolic nature to joining the suffering. And so I would guess the answer is yes. It came to Brazil. Right. Mm-hmm. 69. I thought it was 50, right. So the Inquisition was stopped by the Spanish government in 69. I thought it was a little bit earlier, but yes. Just to repeat, the Inquisition, you're describing, murdered 1 million people in general here on the north, on the Americas side of the ocean. Right. I don't know numbers. That would not surprise me. Again, their treatment of those who were not, they were trying to create one world, one shepherd. Remember, that's what we talked about. That's what they're trying to create. And so anything outside of that bounds needs to be in some way put away. So the answer, yes, there is, because one of the things is many of them fled. All right. Many of them fled, but so think of the following. I'm trying to make sense of two facts. Give me a second to process it all. I know, for example, that when they got to Brazil, okay, conversos had gone to Brazil. They fled there, okay? And then when Denmark overtook Brazil for a period of about 30 years, the conversos all came out of the closet and announced their Judaism and were living comfortably in the Brazilian world. 30 years later, the Spaniards reconquer Brazil. The Jews are now out and vulnerable, and that's what leads to a ship that comes to North America. The 23 Jews who make their first journey here. They're fleeing the newly reestablished Inquisition. From Recife, Brazil. Yes, from Recife, Brazil to the United States, essentially. Yeah. Indigenous. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So just so you know, there's a Luis de Torres synagogue in Freeport, Bahamas. All right, so clearly he was Jewish. So let's now talk Portugal very quickly. Someone brought this up, and then I'm going to see if I can somehow make this work in a few minutes. For those who decided to leave, what is the easiest place to go? Right across the border. Portugal is standing right there, okay? So, as a result, the largest number of Jews who left Spain in 1492 went to Portugal, approximately 100,000 of them. King Juan made them pay a substantial entry fee. You're going to come in, you're going to pay for it. By the way, it's temporary. You can pay, but you're limited to 8 months. Those who couldn't later pay a continued tax were enslaved, and their children were taken from them and sent to an island where they would be colonized there off the African coast, raised as Christians, and would work the cotton fields. Sugar cane fields, my bad. Sugar cane, my bad. It's called Sao Tome. Do I know this? I don't know the island. Those are the ones who tried to go legally. You also have those who are trying to sneak across. If they are caught, they are imprisoned. They are made slaves. Their children are removed and sent to the same island and Christianized and made to work the fields. 1497, 5 years after they've been expelled from Spain, they're now living, these are the people who chose, think of this, these are the people who chose to keep their Judaism and leave. So they've already defined themselves as my primary identity is Jewish. Those who might have said Spaniards stayed. These are the ones who left, okay? Along comes King Manuel I, who replaces the previous king, and he declares that all Jews must convert to Christianity. You're not going to leave. That's not an option, because I want the economic benefit you bring to my country. He's not even giving an expulsion as an option. But you're not going to live here and be Jewish either. You are going to convert, and if you're not consistent with what you're saying, we are going to kill you. This is in 5 years later, and this is what's being forced upon the Jews who had already made the decision that Judaism is my primary identity. He struck first at their children. On March 19, 1497, orders were issued throughout the country for all children. If you have children between the ages of 4 and 14, they are to be presented for baptism on the following Sunday. Children not presented were seized by officials, torn away from their parents, and in many cases the parents tried to smother their children rather than let them go through this. This group, again, was chosen already to rebel. For those, parents literally killed their children and then killed themselves. For those babies who were taken, once they've taken your child, if you don't also follow your children into baptism, the children would be sent across the country elsewhere, as far away from you, and raised as Christians on their own terms. All right, I'm going to stop there because I could go on for another 2 hours, I think. I want you to get a sense of the sheer power of a culture that has 1,000 years of history. Being told to leave first, and then when you go to Portugal, not even leave, give up everything that's important to you. Your family is at stake. Everything you've earned is at stake. Your life is about to change. Just as much as you can, try to parallel it with what it would mean as an American Jew. How many American Jews, what choices would people make? It'd be a very, God willing, we should never have this, but it'd be a fascinating sociological study of where Judaism is at the time. That's where we're going to leave it for today. We will continue next week with the aftermath of this expulsion. That's where we're going the next few weeks. Okay? Questions, comments? I hope I haven't bored you. Yeah. All right. And many of the Jews do go to Venice and Italy. Yeah. Yep.